Despite improvements in the Massachusetts economy, officials at the State House are bracing for a budget deficit of $1.5 billion. Revenue is increasing, but there's a greater increase in costs, especially for health care. Governor Baker's trying to balance the budget without new taxes, but he's challenged by the growing frustration over problems on the MBTA. With a look at state finances and some of the options is our guest, the new president of the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation, Eileen McAnneny. Thank you very much for being with us, Eileen.
Thank you.
I think you're the first one to come out with this, that big figure, $1.5 billion. How did we get to that for the coming year?
Well, that's the result of a few things. One has to do with the fact that in order to balance the fiscal year 15 budget, they used one-time revenues or non-recurring sources of revenues, things like the sale of a state office building, for instance, a tax amnesty program, one-time corporate tax settlements, and the like. So that money wasn't available when you begin fiscal year 16. And then if you add to that the fact that certain accounts for the state, things that they don't have discretion over, like the Mass Health Program or debt service, for instance, or certain aid to cities and towns, that money is non-discretionary, and those accounts, to maintain them at the levels of last year, of fiscal year 15, would require about $1.5 billion, a little shy of that. And then the new revenues coming in are only about $1.2 billion. But in that equation is capital gains, which we can talk about separately. But so when you think about the one-time sources of revenue and then the added cost, and that also assumes that every other line item in the budget is pretty much level funded, that's how you get to that sizable deficit.
Well, the big concern the governor was quick to draw attention to was healthcare. Now, we expected problems over the alignment with the Affordable Care Act, that website that just wouldn't work for so long. But what's the problem with healthcare?
Well, I think healthcare costs in general are rising at a rate higher than inflation. So healthcare across the economy is certainly an issue for employers as they grapple with some of those costs. I think for the state, they have the added challenge, as you've pointed out, of the connector. And in my understanding of the issue is because the connector wasn't working, they allowed folks to go on Mass Health, the state's Medicaid program, without verifying that they were actually eligible. So there are potentially hundreds of thousands of people who are on the Mass Health program that may not qualify. I do know the state is in the process of going through what's called redeterminations to make sure that the folks that are on Mass Health are actually supposed to be. And I think that's a big part of the savings that the Baker administration is hoping for.
And he's also asking state employees to contribute more of the cost of the health care, too.
That is true. And I actually sit on the Group Insurance Commission, which is the body that determines benefits for state employees and retirees. And we did have to just take a tough vote and make some changes to some of the benefit structures. And this shift, if you will, does come in addition to that.
Now, talking about some of the revenue streams coming in, you brought up capital gains, and what is it that makes this particular juncture so tricky?
Well, it's actually a good news, bad news story in that the good news is capital gains revenue are exceeding projections. So that means we're getting more money than we thought we would. The bad news is that there's a statutory requirement that anything in excess of a certain amount has to go into the Stabilization Fund, or the state's rainy day fund, bank account, if you will. And so more money has to go into the Stabilization Fund, meaning there's less money for the operating budget.
So I know the governor has made it clear he doesn't want to take money out of that fund, but I guess maybe putting a bit less money into it, that might not be such a difficult decision.
Yeah, in my mind it is kind of a distinction without a difference in that it is money that was otherwise scheduled to go into the Stabilization Fund that's being used for the operating budget. You know, I'm not overly critical just giving the choices that the governor had, but certainly and so that happened in fiscal year 15 as well. So if this becomes an ongoing diversion of money, that certainly would cause the Taxpayers Foundation some concern.
What about the reasons why we're so far behind in the money? I mean, we talked about some of the spending problems in healthcare especially, but there has been some tightening of revenue streams I know the rate of the income tax has come down a little bit. We voted against indexing the gasoline tax. So I guess we're also making this a bit more challenging, too.
I think we are. You know, the voters did vote in the last election to repeal the indexing of the gas tax. That is something that the Mass Taxpayers Foundation supported because we felt that that money could be used for many transportation needs. So I think the problem does become more challenging. I also think that it's taken a long time for the state to make good on the ballot initiative. Well, I think it was the ballot initiative, and it was several years ago, I think 2000, when voters voted to reduce the income tax. And so we've done it over a period of years. It's now getting to be about 15 or so to reduce that rate. And it does trigger if the state is doing well, if the CPI index grows and so forth. And so we can anticipate that being reduced to 5% in the near term.
What about the governor's idea of trying to trim the payroll with some early retirement incentives?
You know, again, I think that that's reasonable with the caveat that it only works if they actually don't rehire the people back, because they're going to give folks 5 years towards their retirement and essentially increase the benefits to get them to retire early. And if they were to hire them back in a year or two, then you almost have the worst of both worlds. You have higher cost for retirees, plus you have then almost an equal payroll.
Or you could have some consultants coming back to roost, too.
Exactly.
Okay. What about the MBTA? I know the foundation has been following this for quite a while, and you know, when you think of all the things that we say that we need to do, even if you subtract some of the things that maybe aren't quite as vital, it looks like we're still coming up short. We
are. And in fact, the Taxpayers Foundation will be releasing a report, we're hoping to do so next week, that really exposes the financial challenges of the T, and they are very far-reaching, and it really impacts every aspect of the T, whether it be their operational budget, the capital needs, and the like. And so, yeah, that adds to the governor's challenges, no doubt. Any other advice for making things work for the governor at this point? You know, I think that he was probably elected because of his management skills and his promise to try to right-size government. And in some ways, he may, in fact, be the man for the job, because it's going to require some exceptional management skills and expertise to try to wring out some savings without new revenues and without cutting programs to the bone. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you. For the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, Eileen McAnneny. Up ahead, the art segment with Chris Herning.